St. Louis Cemetery 1 was established in 1789 during the Spanish colonial period to replace the older St. Peter Street Cemetery, which had fallen into disrepair. Built just outside the city's original walls, it became New Orleans' main burial ground as the young city grew.
Because the ground was low and prone to flooding, traditional burials were nearly impossible. The solution, drawn from old world custom, was to build an above-ground tomb that mirrors the streets of the living city nearby. Through the 18th and 19th centuries, the cemetery filled with the people who made New Orleans what it is. Creoles of French and Spanish descent, free people of color, enslaved Africans, immigrants from Ireland, Italy, and Germany, soldiers from many wars, and victims of frequent epidemics, especially yellow fever. Families purchased vaults that could be used for generations, with remains carefully moved to make space as time went on. The cemetery holds some of the city's most storied figures. Chief among them is Marie Laveau, the famed voodoo queen of the 19th century, whose tomb still attracts visitors. Other notables include Etienne de Bory, the first mayor of New Orleans and pioneer of the city's sugar industry. Homer Plessy, whose name is tied to the infamous Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court case, and numerous soldiers, priests, and civic leaders. If you want to step inside the hollow gates of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, you gotta do it the proper way, through the official tour. It begins across the street at Basin Street Station, where the old brick walls still whisper of trains and travelers long ago. You check in there, maybe take a moment under the high ceilings and blessed air conditioning, studying maps and displays that tell you what's waiting just beyond. Soon enough, your guide calls the group together, and you step back out into the New Orleans sun. The pavement's shimmering, the air's heavy with jasmine and exhaust, and across Basin Street, the whitewashed walls of the cemetery rise up like a fortress. At the gate, the lock clicks open, and suddenly you've left the modern city behind. Inside, the world turns quieter, the sound of traffic fading to a muffled hum. Narrow walkways stretch ahead, flanked by rows of time-worn tombs. Their plaster cracked, their bricks breathing heat. Some glow white as bone in the sunlight. Others lean with age, mottled in moss and shadow. The air feels different here, still, close, carrying the faint scent of wax, stone, and something older still. The rules are gentle, but firm. No touching the tombs, no food or drink, no wandering off, and they have a no video rule, beyond still photography, as part of the tour company's agreement with the Archdiocese. Reminders that this is not a museum, but sacred ground, still holding the city's dead. The hour passes almost without notice, the sun climbing higher, the marble gleaming like fire under it. When the tour ends, the gates swing open once more, and you step back into the bustle of Basin Street. The living world feels brighter, louder, almost garish, but you carry something different with you. The hush of stone corridors, the weight of stories whispered between tombs, the memory of walking through a city where the past is never buried too deep. Before St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, New Orleans buried its dead on St. Peter Street in the French Quarter. Opened in 1718, it was a humble parish ground of wooden crosses and shallow graves, often disturbed by floods and storms. By the late 1700s, it was overcrowded and unhealthy. So after the fire of 1788, the Spanish moved burials outside the ramparts, creating St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 in 1789 with its brick and stone tombs above ground. But the old cemetery never truly disappeared. Bones and coffin fragments still turned up beneath houses and streets. And archaeologists have uncovered beads, crucifixes, and burial clothes. Nothing remains to see on the surface, yet every step toward the lake on St. Peter Street, in the back of the quarter, so walk over the city's first resting place. Once you step through the gates of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, your eyes land on the Varney tomb, a curious little pyramid built in 1814 for two children who died way too soon. Once it stood whole at the cemetery's center, but the Carondelet Canal cut through its ground, slicing away the front half. Later, Basin Street shoved it aside, leaving it crooked and incomplete. Still, its angled lines hint at the dignity it once held, a reminder that in New Orleans, even the broken carry their share of history. In St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, the tombs aren't just graves. They're family homes of stone, meant to gather generations under one roof. Look inside a family tomb, and you'll find that the interior is more structured than one might suspect. Most family tombs hold one or more front-facing vaults, narrow chambers built into the facade where the most recent burials are placed. Behind those walls lies the true heart of the tomb, a small, shadowed chamber with a floor-level pit called the caveau. When loved ones passed, their coffins were slid into the vault, the doors sealed with plaster and brick, and left to the heat that works like nature's own oven in New Orleans. New Orleans' subtropical climate does the work of centuries in a single year, hastening decay until flesh gave way to dust and bone. By law, a tomb couldn't be opened again for a year and a day, ensuring both respect for the dead and space for the living. When that span was up, the heavy stone door was opened, the remains carefully gathered, and the bones placed gently into the caveau below. Over time, that underground chamber became a silent gathering place, a communal bed where ancestors lay shoulder to shoulder in anonymity, the individual giving way to the family whole. In this way, one tomb might cradle a dozen generations, grandparents, parents, children, all drawn together in the city of the dead. Each life sealed into stone, each death a return to the same small room of memory and dust. Along the edges of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, you'll find the wall vaults. Folks call oven vaults. They're rounded brick mouths lined up like old bake ovens, warming in the sun. These simple chambers were the resting place of ordinary New Orleanians, those who couldn't afford a grand family tomb, or those laid here for just a spell, until their bones could be moved on after a year and a day. Humble though they are, these vaults carry a quiet grace. Their faded names and whitewashed faces standing as proof that in this city of dead, even the simplest resting place holds its share of stories. Tucked among the grand family vaults stand the society tombs, those proud stone houses built by fraternal orders and benevolent associations. Their fronts still bear emblems and inscriptions, crosses, Masonic symbols, names of long-gone lodges, quiet reminders of the brotherhoods and sisterhoods that bound neighbors together. Within, the year and a day rule kept the cycle turning, bones gently gathering below to make room for the next soul. More than just burial vaults, these tombs are monuments to fellowship, proof that in New Orleans, community endures, even in the city of the dead. The Italian Benevolent Society tomb rises like a fortress of white stone, a proud monument built in 1856 by Sicilian immigrants who wanted to be sure their people would never go to the grave forgotten. In those days, New Orleans could be unkind to newcomers, so the society promised its members dignity, a place to rest among their kin, even if they had little in life. Over time, whole generations of fishermen, grocers, and laborers found shelter there, side by side. In 1969, Hollywood stumbled through the gates of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 with cameras rolling for Easy Rider. Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper drifted in a haze, Karen Black and Tony Basil at their side, the Italian tomb towering behind them. Fonda pressed himself against a statue of the Virgin, spilling grief for his mother in a scene so raw it unsettled even the dead. Filmed without permission, it scandalized the church and the city, and from that moment forward, the gates of St. Louis No. 1 were watched more closely. Yet the old Italian tomb endures, half sacred, half cinematic, a reminder that in New Orleans, the stories of the living and the dead are always tangled together. Now, let me tell you about one of the proudest monuments in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, the Society Tomb of the Orleans Battalion of Artillery. These were no professional soldiers shipped in from afar, but the very heartbeat of New Orleans itself. Grocers and carpenters, clerks and planters' sons, French and Spanish Creoles, many of whose families had been here since the days of Bienville. On the morning of January 8, 1815, when the British came marching across that foggy sugarcane field at Chalmette, it was these citizen artillerymen who stood in the center of General Jackson's line, manning the great guns that lined the Rodriguez Canal. They fired until their shoulders ached and their ears rang, sending shot and canisters that ripped through the red ranks and turned the assault into a rout. It was the roar of their cannon, more than anything else, that carried the day and saved the Crescent City. When the guns finally fell silent and peace returned, these veterans bound themselves together in fellowship, forming a society to honor their service. In time, they built themselves a grand tomb in St. Louis No. 1, where brothers in arms could rest side by side as they had fought shoulder to shoulder. Their tomb, with its stone facade carved with symbols of victory and mortality, wreaths, stacked shot, hourglasses, and inverted torches, was erected in the years after the battle, standing as both memorial and gathering place for the battalion's dead. So, when you stroll past that weathered tomb today, you're not just passing a vault of stone. You're brushing shoulders with the very spirit of New Orleans. Men welded together by fire and cannon smoke, who stood their ground for their city and then chose to lie together forever in the silence of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. If you wander down the narrow paths of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, you will eventually stumble upon something that looks like it rose straight out of another world. A gleaming white pyramid, 9 feet tall and sharp against the Louisiana sky. That curious monument belongs to none other than Nicolas Cage. Yes, that Nicolas Cage, who in 2010, right after a spell of hard luck and lost mansions, laid claim to 2 plots in this old city of the day. Folks say he wanted a fresh start. Others whispered he was chasing a bit of mysticism. But for whatever reason, he left behind a spectacle, like he usually does. The stone bears no name, at least not yet, only the Latin words for everything from one, like a secret meant to outlast us all. Some grumble it doesn't belong among the Spanish tombs and society vaults, but the truth be told, New Orleans has always had a soft spot for eccentrics, and so his pyramid stands, waiting patiently, a strange and shiny promise tucked into the city's oldest graveyard. When you take the tour through St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, your guide will likely pause before the DeBarg Blanco family tomb, a tall, whitewashed vault that holds a man whose name once rattled the very foundation of this country, Homer Plessy. His resting place was lovingly restored in the 1990s, with a marker added so visitors could never forget the stand he took. It is a quiet corner in New Orleans, yet the stories tied to that tomb reaches all the way to the Supreme Court. Plessy was born in New Orleans in 1862, part of the city's free Creole community, with French, African, and Caribbean roots woven into his bloodline. He worked as a shoemaker, but it was his role as a citizen that would define him. In 1892, Plessy was chosen by African American leaders in the city to challenge Louisiana's Separate Car Act. He bought a first-class train ticket, sat in the whites-only car, and calmly refused to move. His arrest set the stage for Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, the case that gave legal teeth to segregation under the cruel banner of separate but equal. Though fined just $25, Plessy bore the weight of history. He lived quietly afterwards, working as a laborer, clerk, and insurance collector until his death in 1925. Yet his name endured, tied to both the injustice of Jim Crow and later the triumph of the Civil Rights Movement. Nearly a century after his passing, the state of Louisiana granted him a pardon in 2022, finally acknowledging the nobility of his defiance. And so, in this old cemetery on Basin Street, beneath plaster and marble, Homer Plessy rests, not just as a man, but as a symbol. His tomb a testament to the courage of one citizen who dared to sit where the law said he could not.
Hey y'all, real quick, if you're enjoying this video and want to support our channel, consider becoming a Gulf Coastal Connections member. Members get exclusive extras and help us keep exploring the Gulf Coast and beyond. You'll get perks like our members only podcast, custom emojis, and badges that show off your support. Just click the join button below this video to check it out. We really appreciate it, y'all.
Tucked among the saints and sinners of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, you'll find the proud old tomb of the Pons family, a fine pedimented vault that glooms with Italian marble. The Pons kin laid their loved ones to rest here in the early 1900s, and in 1976, the Archdiocese gave it a careful restoration, making sure its classical lines and white stone still caught the Louisiana sun. The Pons' choice of imported marbles tells you all you need to know. This was a family of some standing, determined that their name endure in dignity. Now, marble wasn't just any stone in 19th century New Orleans. Stonecutters brought it all the way across the Atlantic from Italy. From the world-famous Carrara quarries came slabs of stone with real backbone, marble tough as any old hickory, yet fine enough to shine like river water at dawn, white as fresh-cut cotton, with veins of gray running through it. This rock's been trusted by kings and craftsmen for centuries. Strong, steady, and handsome in its polish, Carrara marble doesn't just stand beside the treasures of any other old quarry. It leads them, proof that nature can outbuild any man. And from this choice imported marble, New Orleans sculptors fashioned closure tablets, sculpture urns, and grand facings for the city's tombs. To build in marble was to say you've made it, and that your family belonged to both this earthly part and the wider world behind. That's why the Great Italian Mutual Benevolent Society tomb, with its Baroque curves and shining facade, still stops visitors in their tracks. In a city of brick, plaster, and rain-worn lime, the shimmer of imported marble was prestige itself, a way of making the resting place as eternal as the soul it was meant to guard. If ever a man left his mark on New Orleans, it was Bernard de Marigny de Mandeville. Born in 1785 to one of the grand old Creole families, he grew up with silver spoons, French manners, and more land than he knew what to do with. Folks said he was handsome, charming, and reckless with a pair of dice. Why, he was the very one who brought the game of craps to this side of the Atlantic after a jaunt to England. He carved up his family plantation just downriver from the quarter and gave us the Faubourg Marigny, a neighborhood still humming with music and life. In politics, he was fiery as they came, forever guarding Creole pride against the tide of Anglo newcomers. Yet for all his brilliance, his pockets ran dry. Lavish living and gambling debts have a way of humbling even the finest names. When the end came in 1868, Marigny was laid to rest in his family tomb in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. That vault, tall and dignified, stands as a monument to his lineage and his restless spirit. Guides love to stop there, spinning tales of the playboy aristocrat who lived grand, lost big, and still gave New Orleans one of its most beloved neighborhoods. This old cemetery holds within its walls not only the grandees of New Orleans society, but also the forgotten souls of those who lived in bondage. When the cemetery was first laid out back in 1788, it was divided neatly into sections, one for Catholics, another for Protestants, a place for strangers, and as the records put it, a section for the Negroes. In truth, that meant the enslaved, men and women who built the city's fortune, but rarely had their names etched in stone. Their burials were simple, often unmarked, tucked away in the far corner, where the grand marble tombs gave way to bare earth and modest vaults. It is a sobering reminder that even in death, New Orleans reflected the divisions of life. The wealthy rested in ornate family tombs, whitewashed and proud, while the enslaved were consigned to modest graves that spoke more of utility than remembrance. Few headstones remain, for memory was not extended to them in the same way it was to their owners, and yet their presence lingers. They too walked these streets, tended the gardens, cut the cane, and bore the weight of the Crescent City upon their backs. In that little section of St. Louis No. 1, they were gathered together at last, enslaved in life, but bound in death to the same earth as the mighty. So when you stroll these narrow aisles today, past the crumbling plaster and the grand monuments of governors and generals, pause for a moment in the quiet corners. For beneath the soil lies the unnamed and unremembered, the enslaved whose bones kept a silent company within the city of the dead. Their graves may not draw tourists or tour guides, but their story is part of the truth in New Orleans, written not in marble, but in memory. The Protestant section of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 is one of those curious little corners where New Orleans history shows its patchwork soul. You see, when the cemetery was first laid out in 1789 under Spanish rule, it was strictly Roman Catholic ground. Back then, Protestants were considered outsiders. Burial among the faithful was reserved for those of the church. But New Orleans, being a busy port full of sailors, merchants, and immigrants, quickly found itself with plenty of non-Catholics who died here and needed a resting place. So in the early years of the 1800s, a portion of St. Louis No. 1 was set aside as a Protestant section. It wasn't large, just a corner near the back wall, but it was a concession to the city's growing diversity. Here you'd have found tombs, wall vaults, and many below-ground graves belonging to Anglo-American merchants, foreign sailors, and Protestants who happened to die in the Crescent City while far from home. Over time, as the city expanded and new cemeteries were opened, like the Girard Street Cemetery, founded in 1822, specifically as a Protestant burial ground, the Protestant section of St. Louis No. 1 became less used. Still, it remains today as a quaint reminder of early accommodations, where the Catholic heart of the city made room, however reluctantly, for other faiths. To walk past those tombs is to see not just New Orleans Catholic heritage, but its place as a crossroads where peoples of all creeds found themselves resting side by side in the end. The story of yellow fever in New Orleans is as much a part of the city's bones as the bricks of the French Quarter. For over a century, from the late 1700s through the 1800s, that dreaded yellowjack haunted every summer, rising with the heat and the mosquitoes that bred in every cistern, rain barrel, and gutter. No one knew at the time that it was the humble Aedes aegypti mosquito that carried the sickness. Instead, folks blamed miasma, swamp vapors, and even divine punishment. The fevers came in waves: 1796, 1817, 1833, 1847, 1853, 1878, each one leaving the city hollowed and grieving. The worst of all was the summer of 1853, where nearly 11,000 people perished in a city of barely 150,000. Families fled upriver if they could, but poor immigrants, Irish, German, Sicilian, were left behind to suffer. Coffins gave out, hearses rolled endlessly, and bodies were stacked in trenches when the graveyards overflowed. The bells tolled until their iron tongues cracked, and the stench of decay lay heavy over Basin Street. The survivors called themselves acclimated, as if living through it once might buy protection against the next scourge. What yellow fever left behind was more than graves. It shaped society. It widened the gap between rich and poor, white and black, Creole and Anglo. It made New Orleans a city of widows and orphans, but also a city of resilience, where life pressed on between outbreaks. Only at the turn of the 20th century did the truth come clear. Dr. Carlos Finley in Cuba suspected the mosquito, and in 1900 Walter Reed's U.S. Army Commission proved him right. With mosquito control, the fever finally loosened its grip. Today we walk these cemeteries and streets with little thought of the scourge, but in truth, yellow fever shaped the very soul of New Orleans. It's why so many tombs stand crowded and whitewashed, why summer once carried dread instead of leisure, and why the city learned early that life here is precious, meant to be lived fully, loudly, and with joy. For tomorrow was never promised. The history of the first American governor of Louisiana, William C.C. Claiborne's family, brings home just how merciless yellow fever was in old New Orleans. Claiborne came here in 1803, a young Virginian charged with overseeing the Louisiana Purchase. And soon found himself not only the first American governor of the territory of Orleans, but also a man at the mercy of the city's climate and disease. His first wife, Eliza Lucy Wilkinson Claiborne, a South Carolina belle, followed him down to the sultry Crescent City. But in 1804, during one of those early fever seasons, she caught yellow fever. The disease struck quick and cruel. High heat, jaundiced eyes, black vomit, and within days she was gone, leaving the governor a widower almost as soon as he'd settled into his new post. She was laid to rest in the Protestant section. Tragedy did not spare him after that. A few years later, Claiborne's young daughter, Marie Eliza Claiborne, also fell victim to the fever. Like so many children of that era, she had no defense against the annual scourge. She too was interred in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, joining her mother beneath the whitewashed vaults. Those losses marked Claiborne deeply. Though he remarried twice, the memory of his first wife and daughter lingered in the city's lore, their early graves standing as solemn proof that yellow fever made no distinction between the powerful and the poor. To this day, their burials in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 remind visitors that even the first American governor of Louisiana could not shield his loved ones from the cruel hand of a New Orleans summer. Benjamin Henry Latrobe, the man they call the father of American architecture. Born in England, he left his mark on the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., fine banks, and grand public works. But in 1810, he came south chasing a noble dream: to give New Orleans a proper water system so her people might be spared the plague that rose each summer. He had the Mississippi harnessed in his mind, clean water flowing to every street, a cure for so much misery. But the city had other plans. In the heat of 1820, yellow fever swept through town, striking down rich and poor alike. Latrobe caught it, and alongside him, his own son, barely 14, and helping his father with the work, fell sick as well. Within days, both were gone, claimed by the same cruel fever they had hoped to defeat. With the cemeteries overflowing, there was no time for marble or monuments. Father and son were laid in a mass grave, their names recorded, but their resting place unmarked among thousands of others. And yet their legacy endures. The elder Latrobe's hand still guides the dome of the Capitol. His vision still echoes in the fight to tame this city's waters. In New Orleans, their story lingers like the scent of magnolia after rain. Bright promise and deep sorrow bonded together, resting quietly behind those weathered walls. If there's one vault in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 that pulls pilgrims from every corner of the earth, it's the Glapion family tomb. For here, folks say, rests none other than Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans herself. The Glapions were a Creole family of some standing, and Marie, though never wed in the church, lived most of her life in a devoted union with Christopher Glapion, a white Creole gentleman of French descent who fought at the Battle of New Orleans. Together, they raised a lively blended brood, some bearing the name Laveau, others Glapion, and in time, the family secured this grand plastered vault, just a stone throw away from the Basin Street gates. The tomb itself is handsome but weathered, its walls kissed by centuries of sun and storm. For years, visitors scrawled X's across its face, hoping for a favor from the Queen, until caretakers finally banned the practice and restored the plaster. Still, the belief lingers. Many swear this is her shrine, the heartbeat of St. Louis No. 1. Now the truth has always carried a touch of mystery. Marie passed in 1881, and most say she was laid here, beside Christopher and their kin. Others whisper she may lay in another Laveau vault nearby. But in New Orleans, tradition is its own gospel, and the people hold fast that this is where the Voodoo Queen sleeps. The union itself tells a tale as tangled as the city. Christopher was white. Marie was a free woman of color with French, African, and native roots. Under the custom of plessage, they shared a home, a family, and a life together, never bound by law, but by love and circumstance. It was common enough in Creole society, yet remarkable still, for it weaves race, faith, and custom into the very fabric of this tomb. Today, the Glapion Vault stands not just as a family resting place, but as a cultural altar. The church may see it as simply another vault under perpetual care, but the faithful lay beads, flowers, and candles at its step, whispering prayers to the Queen. In truth, it embodies New Orleans itself, Catholic and Voodoo, French and African, history and legend, all resting together behind that plaster and stone.
Hey y'all, real quick, if you enjoyed this video and want to support our channel, consider becoming a Gulf Coastal Connections member. Members get exclusive extras and help us keep exploring the Gulf Coast and beyond. You'll get perks like our members-only podcasts, custom emojis, and badges that show off your support. Just click the join button below this video to check it out. We really appreciate it. Thank you for watching. If you're hungry for more of this strange and beautiful chaos that is the Gulf Coast, and if you haven't hit that subscription button yet, now's the time. Don't overthink it, just do it. Until next time, folks, this is Gulf Coastal Connections. Stay curious, stay hungry, and stay salty.